Alright folks, so this is going to be the hottest rappers out. I'm going to do a video on that, just the ones that I think are currently dominating as far as the sickest things and the slickest things and the illest things that they're doing at this point in time. So really, this does not necessarily mean they've dropped an album in 2016, but it just has had lasting appeal. I tried to pick a few recent ones so you could see some of their latest works and that sort of thing, but not always is this the case. So we will do it. The first rapper I'm going to talk about that is really one of the illest out right now is Snoop Dogg, and I can't remind folks enough to go fuck with his album Kool-Aid. This is definitely one to check out. I mean, it's almost like a probably 25-year later version of Doggy Style. Definitely sounds more current. I mean, in terms of having a song as big as Gin and Juice or Who Am I, maybe not necessarily that point, but it is damn near pretty close. So this is good. I mean, once again, I did review this, so it's a pretty recent review of mine. Make sure you support Kool-Aid and understand that sort of stuff. Rap has just been very light this year. I think for the most part between Kanye West and Drake, you know, and maybe a couple other cats like Designer and some of these other folks, it's been a rather mild year in terms of just classic rap albums. Really, it took until about July for me to start, and this is not an insult to what's out, but, really some of the more makeshift rap music, which is more blue-collar, I want to say blue-collar rap, Drake and some of the other cats, Big Sean and a couple other ones, I just don't vibe with that as much as I do in a good old-fashioned drink slicker rapper. So that's really the thing. And so that's Snoop Dogg. I mean, definitely Kool-Aid. I mean, he's apparently, I'm not quite sure what else he's going to do. I'd like to see, if really I had to see more of Snoop Dogg, I would like to see him do another surprise album like he did with Wiz Khalifa. Like, I'd like to see another Mac and Devin, or just something he just kind of pulls out. I kind of thought ahead, and there's actually an album he did with Daz Dillinger, but I'm still kind of adjusting to it. So that dropped in January. He did do a collabo album, but I mean, that I do, if you're looking for that, Daz Dillinger's in the Dog Pound, and that was one of the seminal acts of 90s rap. So he is one of the members, and they decided to do an album, and that's one. But so alright, that's one of the rappers. There's going to be 6 of these guys. The next one is Gucci Mane, and he just came out with his most recent album, Everybody's Looking, and it's supposedly, this is a new Gucci Mane, which I guess shouldn't come as a surprise, because the man, I mean, this entire decade he's had his problems. He's basically been arrested every year since, and then either been arrested or been in jail every year since this year. So between that and the excitement of what's been going, you have to remember his work ethic. Just the fact that he got out last week of May and had an album out basically 2 months in. I mean, once you have to go through with, the finishing touches on an album, which sometimes could take 4 or 5 months, he got that out pretty quickly. So this man drops mixtapes like nobody's business. Sometimes he can drop 5, 6, or 7 a year, and I did review some of his Trap God series. I'm deciding if I'm going to still do mixtapes, but he does have some extra stuff. And this has been his most recent album. But the real album I want to recommend, the work of art that he did that proves why he's the slickest doing it, or one of, is the album The Appeal. Now, this is definitely an album I feel like doesn't get a lot of attention, but the State vs. Rager Davis was one of Gucci Mane's most popular albums. It's where all the hits came from. If you remember Lemonade, which that's a really good song, and the song with Usher, and then Wasted, he did manage to get 3, which is something he never does. But then he just kind of vanished after that, and really, the promotion of the album was just not put together, and he came back with The Appeal, and then that only had the song Gucci Time, which hardly charted. So really, that's kind of an ignored project, and basically after that album, Gucci Mane stopped charting. So it was kind of like, obviously he did have much more releases between that time and when he went to prison, but it just felt as if he was getting ready to be, well, this is difficult kind of saying that, because Gucci Mane having hits like Usher, or having hits like Lil Wayne or Drake or something like that, it just feels like that's not going to happen. So even if it isn't, it still stands to reason that he does drop some good music, but this is kind of an ignored project, is The Appeal, Georgia's Most Wanted. So that's another one. The next one is Tech N9ne, and of course I had to put him on this list just because, as to what he does, he is probably one of the best album makers who isn't a mainstream rap artist. And the thing with it is, Eminem is not going to be on this list. So he will not be here, mainly because I think he has enough exposure already, and it's not really something we have to worry about. I mean, obviously most people know because his albums went diamond, and he's charted numerous times. It's pointless to include him in the list. So Tech N9ne is not so much so. He's really hardly ever charted with any of his songs, and I feel like in a lot of ways he needs like that breakthrough album. And where I live in Missouri, this is where Tech N9ne's from, so he's a little bit larger here. But as far as crossing over, it wasn't until the album All Sixes and Sevens that he started getting super big name guests. I mean, Snoop Dogg was on it, Yellow Wolf I think was on it, Twista was on it, Busta Rhymes was on it, Lil Wayne was on it, I think, Lil Wayne was on it, this E40 was on it, just a bunch of these cats were on All Sixes and Sevens, and that was kind of seen as to where, okay, Tech N9ne's kind of like an underground staple, but you can't not pay attention to the albums he did before that. And so the album I'm going to say that is the album that needs to be heard is the album KOD. So basically this album is in the flavor of Relapse. And this is the biggest thing about it. I think most people remember Relapse, but Tech N9ne kind of had the same spin on it, and it stands for King of Darkness. So that meant it is kind of a horrorcore album, but a few of the songs that I feel like are noteworthy off this project are Black in the Sun, Demons, Low, Leave Me Alone, and Killing You. Now really with these songs, I mean each and every one, I feel like the biggest thing about approaching Tech N9ne is just trying to find the correct songs to do it, because he has a lot of music and he doesn't really have like his most known songs. That's kind of the problem. I feel like Einstein is one of those, maybe a couple other ones like Worldwide Choppers and Midwest Choppers, but when it comes to like the proper album to introduce to him, it's kind of difficult, and I don't want to sideswipe Tech N9ne as if he's like a song guy versus an album guy, because that's definitely, I mean, I promise you that that's not the case. So I mean, that's the biggest thing with Tech N9ne is just supposing that, but he does. I mean, a lot of people will say the slickest rappers in the game right now, every one of them has to have a charting hit on the Billboard or wherever you live. And the whole thing about it is, it's not necessarily the case. I mean, you could just as soon live in underground rap versus the radio, which is something, you know, obviously rap has a hard enough time charting as it is. And, you know, in America, we only really like the softcore type songs. So that's what we find charting. Tech Nine, Gucci Mane, sometimes Snoop Dogg, they really have no business on the charts. But, you know, it stands to reason that a lot of this music, if you forego it because it's not on the radio, you're mistaken. So the next one is DJ Paul, and I mean, this one I had to pick more often just because of the emphasis of 3 6 Mafia. Back what they used to do, I mean, their albums were pretty fat. I mean, this is definitely one that they have some really good albums underneath their belt. And the whole thing was after 2008, they kind of went solo, and, you know, people said they wanted that 3 6 Mafia album, but it just never surfaced. And so Juicy J and DJ Paul went their separate ways, but DJ Paul kind of started dropping solo albums, and I consider those like an extension of 3 6 Mafia, and they virtually are. Basically, between everything that DJ Paul has done since about late 2012 has been effective enough to really consider. I mean, there's A Person of Interest, which came out in 2012, but just between 2014 and late 2015, within the span of a year, he dropped several killer projects. There was the Mafia 6 mixtape, the Killjoy Club, which is the 3 6 Mafia members and Insane Clown Posse on a album together. I mean, obviously, the whole album is good. Then you had the Mafia 6's album, and then DJ Paul dropped an album in last fall called Master of Evil. So basically everything he's done, I mean, he's a little bit rowdier of a rapper than some of these other guys, but, I mean, really, the way he puts together the music, I mean, 3 6 Mafia lives on, and this is definitely one thing to know.